The vagus nerve has two branches, the ventral vagal and the dorsal vagal. The ventral vagal social safety system is from about the diaphragm upwards, and the dorsal vagal, more primitive system, is from the diaphragm and below, mostly our digestive system. As you know, the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight or flight. The dorsal vagal system would be what activates freeze, faint, fold, and fawn. The ventral vagal system we could refer to as tend and befriend. And in general, the parasympathetic nervous system is often referred to as rest and digest. The parasympathetic nerves, or the vagus nerve predominantly, connects from the brain to all of our organs and facilitates rest and digest, where the organs are relatively relaxed and able to function. The sympathetic nerves cause the fight or flight responses that inhibit many of our organs in favor of using our large muscle groups and accessing adrenaline for fight or flight. A gazelle story. A group of gazelles is grazing and suddenly one looks up. Hyper aware of what's happening around him, the whole group notices and pays attention. And that's a novelty cue. After a moment, the lioness starts her chase. The gazelle she's singled out runs as fast as he can, sympathetic nervous system, until he's caught. Parasympathetic. When he's caught, he instantly goes limp. Parasympathetic nervous system, relaxing his body. When the gazelle was caught with fangs around his neck, his shutdown response kicked in and he froze. The dorsal vagal shutdown, which occurs when there's no longer any way to fight. The safety cue, which relates to the parasympathetic ventral vagal, involves the process of co-regulation, where we are socially connected and feel safe. The novelty cue alerts the sympathetic shift, where ventral vagal connection is paused or withdrawn, and we shift to being on alert. The reward cue relates to the sympathetic E, or excitatory aspect, where we're in an approach or pursue play state. The threat cue engages the sympathetic nervous system defense, where we flee, in this case, or we will also talk about attack. The flight response, according to Pete Walker, is when you believe you can overcome the danger by running away. So your brain prepares your body for flight. Sometimes running away is your best option. After all, unless you're a firefighter, you probably want to run out of a burning building. And related to this, the amygdala in social anxiety is over-responsive or triggered by the human face. The amygdala is the part of the triune brain that alerts the beginning of fight or flight. So people with social anxiety read social interactions as potentially more activating. If someone tends to always lean towards flight, they might be considered using an obsessive-compulsive defense. Over-identification with the perfectionistic demands of their inner critic, denial and minimization about the costs of perfectionism is essential, especially with workaholics who have a badge of pride or superiority. If someone tends to combine the flight and fawn responses, they might be seen as a workaholic type, who makes herself useful to others, the model secretary, in the vein of her favorite role model, Mother Teresa. The freeze response is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system and shift towards the dorsal vagal complex in response to threat. You have cold, numbness in your body, skin becomes pale, you feel stiff or heavy, you have a sense of dread, your heart's pounding, your heart rate may decrease, and you feel yourself tolerating the stress. If someone leans more often to a freeze type, they may be using a dissociative defense. Freeze types are in denial about the consequences of their adaptation, continuum that ends with the collapse response. Dissociation is possibly just the psychological correlate of freezing. With no movement, thought and perception loses its anchor in the body and the here and now. The dorsal vagal shift can also cause someone to freeze in movement, but also temperature drop. If someone has a combination of fight or flight in their typical response, they could be referred to as a schizoid type. This type avoids his feelings and potential relationship re-traumatization with an obsessive-compulsive dissociative two-step that severely narrows his existence. Shame is also part of the fight or flight system. From an article, this quote is, "When faced with shame, the brain reacts as if it were facing physical danger and activates the sympathetic nervous system, generating the flight, fight, freeze response. The flight response triggers the feeling of needing to disappear, and children, or doggies, who have this response will try to become invisible. They'll literally look smaller, and their expressions become blank. The fight response is a sympathetic nervous system defensive response, which alerts and raises the physical symptoms of, for instance, adrenaline, and decreases the parasympathetic functions of digestion and so on. The fight response happens when you feel you're in danger, but you believe you can overpower the threat. Your brain sends messages to your body to quickly prepare you for the physical demands of fighting. When overwhelmed and fighting or fleeing isn't working anymore, the dorsal vagal cue triggers faint, fold, or flag. Feeling shut down, collapsed, depressed, or numb is an indication that you're in the defensive reactions of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is characterized by immobilization. And fainting is known as the vasovagal syndrome or vasovagal syncope, and the dorsal vagal process of what could be referred to as an emergency brake. And animals that play dead may be responding to this dorsal vagal threat cue. The fawn response, according to Pete Walker, is when you've tried fight, flight, or freeze several times without success. You may find yourself using the fawn response. People who tend to fawn typically come from abusive families or situations. Fawn types seek safety by merging with the wishes, needs, and demands of others. Someone with a tendency towards fawn and fight might be referred to as a smothering mother type, who, quote, coercively or manipulatively takes care of others and who smothers them into conforming with her view of who they should be. The combination of fawn and freeze might relate to a domestic violence victim type, quote, numbingly surrendering herself to scapegoating or to a narcissist's needs to have a target for his rageaholic releases. The fight type as a predominant defense might be seen as narcissistic, and treatment or strategy to respond might be timeouts can be used to accurately redirect the lion's shares of their hurt feelings into grieving and working through their original abandonment, rather than displacing it destructively onto the current intimates. A person who combines fight and fawn is most susceptible to love addiction and combines two opposite but magnetically attracting polarities of relational style: narcissism and codependence.